Two Guys, One Movie, Friday on Elm Street edition.
Part 11.
Takes Manhattan.
The Dream Warrior.
Yes, we are talking about Freddy vs. Jason, the greatest court drama since Kramer vs. Kramer, here on Two Guys, One Movie, the countdown to Halloween. And we're 1 day away.
1 day away.
I wonder what we'll be talking about tomorrow.
I don't know. You'll have to tune in to listen.
Yes.
But
what you'll hear will surprise you.
Freddy vs. Jason. I mean, it basically, when I first heard this movie was coming out, it was, it's a dream come true. They're possibly one of the greatest, serial killers versus another great serial killer. I mean, when do you ever get crossovers like this?
Never. Not since Abbott and Costello met Frankenstein and the Wolfman.
Although now, I do want to before we jump in and start talking more about it, I just want to say, the reactions were really mixed about this. There's some people that I know that really don't like this at all. Some people I know that like it, and some people that think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a very divisive film.
Do you think that they're judging it based off of their love for the other characters? Or do you think they're actually watching it and just judging it based on its own merits? Or do you think the hype? Because I remember waiting out. This was the movie you had to go to the theater and see because you wanted no one to spoil what happened.
Before we even get to this, let's give a bit of backstory. This film had been in development for a good decade before it actually came to fruition. What most people don't realize is that Paramount Studios is the one that financed and backed and produced the original Friday the 13th franchise. That would have been the original Friday the 13th through Friday the 13th Part 8, which was Jason Takes Manhattan, which was the last one in that original series. Sometime after that, New Line Cinema, which produced the Friday the 13th franchise, picked up the rights to the Friday the 13th franchise, and would eventually go on to produce Jason Goes to Hell, which was the 9th film in the Friday the 13th series, but not directly connected to the other films. The thing that got people talking, though, was the end of Jason Goes to Hell, which was when Freddy's claw comes up, takes a mask, and drags it down into the ground.
Which was if you haven't seen Jason Goes to Hell, that's really the only saving feature of the entire movie.
And pretty much. The movie is really hard to swallow. It pretty much does for the Friday the 13th franchise, as far as the stuff that they add into it about the Voorhees family and whatnot. It really did to Jason what they did to Michael Myers during the late 80s and early 90s, where they really just kind of injected a bunch of stuff that really didn't need to be there. But it was the first line by New Line Cinemas, and people thought that final scene was supposed to be a representation, or a tease for a new movie coming out, which was supposed to be Freddy vs. Jason. And to a degree, it kind of was, but it was, talking to, there was a lot of reporters who ended up talking to, those involved with the film at that time, and it was supposed to be a symbolic gesture, a sign that New Line Cinema was now in control of this franchise. So it's a little bit kind of like a middle finger to Paramount Studios to a small degree. But that's all it really was a wink and a nod and a gesture from New Line Cinema that they had now control of both of these iconic characters. So you had people talking for a good, because I think, Jason Goes to Hell came out in 94 or something like that? So for 9 years, this movie had been in development. 93. So it took 10 years for this movie to hit the screen, and anyone who had been on the internet from that point up until 2002 had seen dozens of scripts online, and mind you, a lot of these were legit. They were very much real scripts, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And they had alternate endings, and you'll hear a lot of discussion, especially in the commentary and afterwards, all the interviews that have been done, that a lot of these endings that we saw, one of the most iconic ones that people have read about, or hear about at least, is the supposed Pinhead ending, which would have had the Hellraiser franchise coming in at the end, with both Jason and Freddy being dragged to hell, and Pinhead stopping the two from fighting and saying, what seems to be the problem here, or something along that lines.
Actually looking through certain scripts and stuff that they had, there was a potential story, that one was titled The Millennium Massacre, where Freddy was revealed to be a counselor at Camp Crystal Lake, and he actually molested Jason as a child.
Yep.
And then there was another one where Freddy had a cult called Fredheads who were going to sacrifice a little girl to Freddy, leading to the girl's older sister putting her dead boyfriend's heart in Jason's body to fight Freddy and rescue her younger sister.
Yeah.
So there were wacky ideas.
Oh, yeah.
So be thankful for the movie we got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, there was a long time coming. There's a lot of, we're talking dozens of scripts that were actually written for this film because they had no idea how to bring these two franchises together. And the movie that we got actually had a very simple and logical way of bringing the two together.
It made sense to me.
Yeah. They made the entire population of, Springwood, Illinois, forget about Freddy, because if you remember in the franchise, Freddy's power comes from fear. If you're not afraid, in the first film they show that Nancy turns her back on Freddy, he loses all power and he fades away. So if you're not afraid of him, he has no power over you. If you forget about him, he has no power.
I saw that little tag you snuck in there. Yeah. Yes, nice.
So if he has no power, if he has no power and you forget about him, he has nothing. So how does he get people to remember him? You hire a guy to pretend to be you.
And basically all the murders will start happening in the town. People are going to be like, oh god, this is just like, back then when he who shall not be named was around.
Yeah.
And then it's like, who should not be named?
Because
Freddy Krueger.
Because you're in Springwood, no one's going to think, well, that guy who was responsible for all those killings out in, I think, Massachusetts or whatever, Connecticut, that's, the location of Crystal Lake is changed so goddamn often. I mentioned in another podcast very briefly that Springwood, Illinois is actually, I think it's Illinois, it's Ohio, I think. They changed it a couple times too, but it's always been in the Midwest, except for the first film, which is actually supposed to take place in Los Angeles. They changed it on them because they wanted to change it from someplace like LA, even though it looks exactly like LA. If you watch the first film, you can tell this is, the suburbs of LA. But they wanted to turn it into, like the heart of America, Main Street, USA. So they didn't want to nail it down to a real location. So they came up with a new name. That's what they got. But Crystal Lake usually moves somewhere along the East Coast, which is why he goes to Manhattan. He takes a boat and he drifts off to Manhattan. Jason, that is. So that always changes. They're not going to associate the Crystal Lake killings with the Springwood killings. So they're going to think, like Charles said, they're going to think Freddy did it. The guy who shall not be named, and you're not allowed to mention it. They point that out several times in the film. Do you think it could be that Krueger say that? And they bring up,
of course, he starts to be remembered, and he gets some of his powers back.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately,
pretty much how Freddy got his groove back.
Jason realizes that Freddy's been manipulating him, and all hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
literally,
very much so. And you get a really fun movie. It's a train ride.
I mean, I know...
Choo-choo, motherfuckers.
When you hear Freddy vs. Jason, I imagine part of the thing that people didn't like was the story to get to it, but you can't just throw them in there fighting. I mean,
you could, but everyone's going to wonder why are these two together.
The way they described it is, after reading some of the other possible ideas that could have brought it, it made sense. It was simple. It wasn't too out there.
Yeah. And they had done it before because in Nightmare 3, which is, arguably one of our favorites, the Dream Warriors, Weston Hill, the psychiatric facility in this film is featured in that film. It's the birthplace of Freddy Krueger. And during that film, Nightmare 3, they actually do use drugs to suppress dreams, and they try to make the kids forget about their nightmares, about the boogeyman who's killing them all off. So it made sense to even tie that into it. It all made sense. But honestly, I think the reason people didn't like it is because it didn't live up to the hype.
As I said, is it a matter of the hype, or is it actually just a lack of writing that disappointed people?
I will admit there are a few scenes in here that are kind of shitty. The Alice in Wonderland caterpillar scene, the CGI looked kind of shitty. The Freddy pillar kind of thing. I like the idea, but it looked terrible.
You had to have, obviously, a group of kids that were fighting as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
you had to have modern kids, too. You couldn't have these wishy-washy 80s kids.
And they had to, they had to play a role in it, but you still had Freddy and Jason, and they did have backstory here and there, and the kids were kind of the main story for for the beginning.
Yeah.
But, once you got to the fighting scenes, how could you even be disappointed in once it starts picking up? It drags a little in the beginning, but once you get to that scene where they actually start fighting back and forth, there's some epic scenes. And for how many years we've all been waiting for it, they could have made it worse. They could have made it maybe a little better, but I'm very happy with what I got.
The final result is actually pretty good.
And it is a movie that I actually go back and watch more than I probably watched some of the Nightmare on Elm Street, and more than I watched some of the Friday the 13th for sure.
Definitely. Honestly, I think the biggest fault with the movie might be its cast. No one has any real strong performances outside of a couple individuals, including Robert Englund, of course. Jason
Robert
Ritter,
Englund coming back as Freddy
and his final
role.
His final appearance as Freddy Krueger, picked up by Jack Earl Haley in the remake. But Jason Ritter, he was actually pretty good in it. He played that kind of like, I might be crazy kind of role, but you're not quite sure. He played that pretty well. Honestly, I think nobody's going to give credit to Kelly Rowland for anything she did in this film. She wasn't particularly any good. She looked really old in the movie. She was really outplayed. I think she was a lot older than most of the other people in the film at that point. The girl who played Laurie, the lead, not a big fan. She was very weak.
Monica Keena?
Yeah, very weak acting. It could have been the script, the dialogue, but I don't think she's ever going to be remembered for her acting. She looked like the typical girl that would get killed off in a Nightmare film, and then replaced with the normal or not so pretty girl. We saw that with the original Nightmare, where Tina gets killed off after being the main character for the first part of the film, and then Nancy takes over. The Every Girl, the girl next door, takes over.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe Gib or one of the other girls, that looked a little bit more down to earth, were going to replace her, but no, she stays through the whole film. And she's the girl, but she looks like the type that would get killed off in these films pretty early on. Weak acting, I don't like using the term because people aren't going to like it even though it's accurate. She's the bimbo character for much of it.
Yeah, I mean, but that, in all those other horror films, I mean, granted, yeah, characters stand out when you go back and watch certain, in the first one. But it's also because these actors and actresses, you see Johnny Depp, of course.
Yeah.
And it's now you see him as Johnny Depp. You go back and, you see Kevin Bacon in the Friday the 13th, that's, you know who he is.
Christopher Glovin.
I mean, they had all these people, and now you go back. We're watching a movie, granted, some of these characters haven't, actors and actresses haven't really gone on to super things, but if there was one, that made it, then you would go back and watch this and maybe have a different view of it.
I'm not going to stand here and say that all the actors in the old films were superstars or anything like that. But what I mean is that the characters themselves were at least portrayed well enough in those.
But I think they were also, they were written to be kind of, the dumb kids and stuff like that.
Well, think about it this way. In the Nightmare films, Nancy was a very strong character. She actually has a really strong arc. She goes from being a weak, normal character to being strong.
But Nightmare on Elm Street is completely not the same Freddy at all in the Freddy we're watching in Freddy vs. Jason.
Oh, yeah.
Freddy totally changed into a different evil spirit.
He pretty much is the same Freddy that you saw in the first film, kinda in the second, and then the rest of the franchise not at all. Because it's by the third one where he became very entertaining, as opposed to the first two where he was very dark, covered in shadows. But my point is that you get these. Friday the 13th is well known for having very strong female leads. Freddy vs. Jason did not have that, and that was probably for fans. That was probably a big turnout because he had this really weak lead. Though you had a strong supporting cast, at least a co-star with Jason Ritter. I mean, he's the son of Jonathan Ritter, so you knew he had some chops to him. He had some talent.
And actually, Brad Renfro was going to be originally cast as Will, but had to be replaced the week before, and Jason Ritter got the part.
And they actually didn't even want him for the part. He had tested for it.
Renfro was a tremendous actor before he passed away, and he would have been great in the role. I thought it would have been worked really well.
It definitely would have been interesting.
And, now, we're talking about how, people, the hype was built up and stuff. And we're talking about how they were trying to make this film. This actually, New Line tried to make this film several times in the 80s as well, but they never could make a deal with Paramount.
Yep.
Do you think if this was made in the 80s, it would still be as big? Or do you think that would have maybe tainted the Friday the 13th? Because if it was owned by Paramount and New Line, neither one's going to want their man to lose.
Then again, we also got the ending we got in this film, which kind of showed that you can do that. I think the issue with it really lies in the fact that in the 80s, I don't think we would have gotten the type of movie that we got. It probably would have come off as really hokey and gimmicky, as opposed to something that had more of a story, which, we talked about, it took a while to get built up to, the point where it did towards the end of the film. I think it just would have been kind of this hackneyed kind of situation where we might have gotten one of those earlier scripts, and because back then, the scripts were getting worse and worse as the movies progressed. And there's a lot of discussion. I believe it was, there was a documentary, I know we discussed this before, off the podcast. There's a documentary that came out recently in the last couple of years with, Nightmare on Elm Street. And they go through every movie and they talk with the cast and crew of each individual film and they bring them all in. And I believe by like part 4, they barely even had a script when they were shooting. Like they had like pieces of a script. It was like Iron Man. They had like an outline and nothing else. And they had spots. By part 5, they pretty much had no script. The guy who directed it was his first directing gig. He pretty much lied his ass off to get it. It was like his first time in the U.S. getting like a directing gig. And they did it by the seat, by the seat of their pants. That's the kind of film we would have gotten back then with this. We would have gotten the whole Freddy was a camp counselor, or a girl took her boyfriend's heart and put it in. We would have gotten something like that. We would not have gotten anything that came remotely close to this, which was a fun, proper way to do this movie. It might not have, like you said, it might not have been the best. It definitely was not the worst, but it was probably the best we could have hoped for with all the hype and all the years it took to get here. It could have ended up like King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't even remember that movie. They remember the idea, and they misremember a lot the ending, which was another ambiguous ending. People always think that there was 2 versions, a Japanese and an English version. Not true. It's just that most people misremember it.
Yeah.
Very easily to forget. That's probably what we would have gotten back in the 80s.
Now, since we're talking about the ending, I'm gonna I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so it's spoilers coming, but now, there's no way you can make this movie without disappointing somebody.
Yes.
If you had a draw, you're just gonna piss everybody off.
Mm-hmm.
If you have Jason win, then you're gonna piss the Freddy fans off. If you have Freddy win, you're gonna piss the Jason fans off. I'm a Freddy fan, so, spoiler, I was disappointed at the end. But they didn't actually have him completely get destroyed, because remember, even if Freddy gets killed, he usually comes back anyway.
Yeah.
And he's carrying his head at the end, and he winks.
As we learned in Nightmare 6, Dream Demons gave him this power. He can't really die.
So, I mean, were you dissatisfied with the ending, or do you think they did as best they could? I mean, because there was another ending that you briefly mentioned, Pinhead, where they were going to actually have Freddy and Jason battling to the death on the dock after an explosion. The lake was going to have a giant hole and start draining, and they were going to get dragged down in this hole. Jason basically holding Freddy and then dragging each other down.
Yeah.
And then, basically, Freddy's gonna be on the ground, vowing to destroy, the next day, Lori and her father find Freddy's claw on the ground in the drained lake, and they're vowing to destroy it, and then a red and green striped arm bursts through the earth and grabs Dr. Campbell's leg and pulls him down, and basically pulls him down one last time, and he disappears. Lori claws at the dirt, screaming for him, and then Freddy puts his claw back on, and he sees Jason and the machete, and as they're about to go at each other, chains shoot out, slicing into both of them. They're separated, struggling to go at each other. When out of the darkness comes Pinhead, it says, now what seems to be the problem. However, New Line didn't like the idea, so we didn't get that. Do you think that would have been better? Or do you think that would have maybe cheapened having someone come in at the end?
I think it would have. Let's put it this way: we're both wrestling fans. We do the juice, obviously. We talk about wrestling a lot. We do bring it up occasionally on these discussions, especially even on the commentary. It would have been the equivalent of stealing the heat. It would have been you had this great match, and then all of a sudden there's a run-in that ends the match, even though it should have ended one way or the other. It would have stolen from the ending quite a bit. And I'm just talking generally as a non-fan and whatnot, just logistically writing it as a writer, as a storyteller. You're talking about pulling away from your main characters, or your main villains at this point, and you're introducing someone else just for shock value. Now, it would have been cool, as a fan, it would have been really cool to see, but I can understand why New Line would have done it, because at this point there have been a lot of sequels that have been done, a lot of direct-to-video stuff that really destroyed the quality of the franchise for Hellraiser. So it devalued Pinhead a lot, outside of, hardcore fans. Now you take that into consideration. You also have to take into consideration the fact that, what's the point? New Line Cinema's gonna buy the rights to this character for a lot of money just to inject him into a final scene that, people are probably gonna forget.
I don't think they'd forget. I'd actually think that would be in the case.
Or you had a lot of people asking, who the hell is this guy?
If you did that, then you would also want to make a deal with New Line that you're going to make a sequel right then and there and buy more rights to it,
Yeah.
But, then there was also pitch for an ending where it was very similar to that, but instead of Pinhead, basically there's 2 horns and
Lucifer's
eyes,
in the
basically, background. And Freddy and Jason are battling in a gladiator-style pit, below him, which I think would have been interesting too.
It would have been interesting, but I don't know if it would have had the impact that the ending that we got, which is Jason pulling himself out of the lake and Freddy's head in tow, and then Freddy winking at the camera. Because it
gives you the what if, and it leaves it open.
Yeah, it definitely leaves it open, and also I think it really hits home the fact that, it shows who both these characters are. You get this silent giant this shark coming out of the water, and then you get this trickster who still didn't lose. It's pretty much, it would have been kind of, it's the Loki ending that we got in Thor, too.
I will say, when I was in the theater watching it, as I was coming out, I had the vision of Homer Simpson. Wow, I can't believe Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father.
Spoilers.
Just wanting to say that, you know. But, do you think the way they left it that we could ever have a sequel? And if we did have a sequel, how could you even attempt? I mean, because Freddy already and Jason are already battling, so.
I don't think we're ever going to see a sequel. One, Robert Englund's already up in age. Two,
well, obviously Robert Englund wouldn't be able to return.
Two, we've already rebooted the franchises, and Friday the 13th is already supposedly scheduled to be rebooted again. And I don't even know if New Line owns the rights to them anymore, because I believe Dimension Films, or technically the Michael Bay's production company, is the one that owns the rights now to Friday the 13th. I believe they sold the rights off, because New Line Cinema's been doing pretty bad. I believe they're now a subsidiary of Warner Brothers.
I'm not 100% sure.
They got bought out by Warner Brothers a long time ago. There was a big thing back when that happened, because they had been this big independent studio and they were bought out by Warner Brothers.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but definitely something possibly to look into. But I mean, there's still possibility that companies can come together. It's not, it's not likely. But now, actually, there was a sequel, planned, but never happened, obviously. But we did get a 6-issue comic series,
and I did read that too.
And it was in about 2008, and they actually added Evil Dead's Ash to the mix, which I thought would have, I remember hearing that he could have came too.
Yeah, there was a lot of ideas they were doing. I think it was because it was one of the drafts there was a draft or something like that. I believe there was actually a draft that actually had him in it, but they didn't have the rights to it. And I think it was not long after, the Army of Darkness had come in. So Ash had come back, back into the film world again, after years of being away from Evil Dead 2. So, I mean, it would have been interesting, but again, it's like, well, if you're not going to utilize them properly, why have them at all?
In that documentary you were talking about, it's called Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy.
There we go.
Yes. I believe that's on the new Blu-ray that was released, the special edition Blu-ray.
It might have been. It's a very good documentary. I guarantee anyone who watches it, who's a fan of the franchise, really going to enjoy it. You're going to get a lot of tidbits that you didn't know, and you're going to get a lot of either yays or nays and a bunch of rumors.
The documentary, his name's Jason, was really interesting too, to go with Jason.
Yeah.
And then
I didn't think it was quite as,
I know we're not talking about him, to throw it in there. Michael Myers has a documentary too.
Yes,
that was actually really good.
That's a podcast for another day on that one.
But
what day?
So, now it's time to get to the rating.
The rating.
IMDb gives it a 5.8.
As a general moviegoer, I can see why it would get so low. It's not the best of either film franchise.
No, but it is one that I would watch. I can watch more again and again.
It's rewatchable.
Compared to some of the other films.
But for what it is, as just a film in general, not as a fan of either franchise or both, I can see why people would not like it. I'm
gonna give it a 7.
I would give it a 7.5.
I didn't, as I said, the hype was really, there was a lot of hype, so it was hard for them to even attempt to live up to it.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Englund coming back is just solid for me.
Yes. And he gets to do the Dark Freddy that he hadn't had an opportunity to do for years, that he revisited briefly with, New Nightmare.
Ken Kersinger played Jason, just did a brilliant job as Jason. The fight scenes they had really, hyped it perfectly well. I liked the fight scenes. The only thing that I was a little disappointed is the ending and the beginning to drag a little bit here and there.
I mean, like I said, it's not the best of either franchise, but it's not the worst. Because Lord knows that there's a lot of there are a lot of bad Friday the 13th entries. There are a couple really bad entries in Nightmare on Elm Street, or they don't really hold up by comparison to the earlier films. So I can't say it deserves to be marked as some of the worst. It's not the best, so somewhere in between. So I'd say it would be at least a C to C plus, somewhere there. At least a 7.5 easily compared to the other films. As a film itself, I can see why I got 5.8. I would give it at least a 7.0. Definitely, more than likely a 7.5. A solid C for effort and everything else that went into it.
Comes from the director Ronnie Yu, who also directed Bride of Chucky.
Mm-hmm.
It was better than Bride of Chucky.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
And again, those movies weren't all that great to begin with.
That's true.
That's another
day.
That's definitely another day. Maybe. We'll see. There's always next Halloween. Or maybe it's tomorrow. I guess you'll have to listen to find out.
Yeah. basically, thanks for listening to our Halloween countdown. We have one more day left. We're excited, and make sure to check us out tomorrow.
Yeah. So I guess this is going to do it for Two Guys, One Movie, the Friday on Elm Street edition.
Part 11
Takes New York.
takes Manhattan.
Well, we don't want to do that again.
Jersey.
Jersey.
Nobody ever attacks Jersey.
Nobody wants to. Okay, with that, we're going to sign off before Kevin Smith attacks us.
So, yeah. And remember, when Freddy fights Jason, no matter who wins, we lose.